This is Chris Collinsworth. Be sure to check out the PFF College podcast as our experts provide insight on all the league's top stories. Every game, every player, every play. Download and subscribe on iTunes or your favorite provider.
Hello and welcome back to the PFF podcast. The first week of the playoffs is in the books, Mike. We've got 4 games down, 4 teams out of it, 4 teams looking for the draft. We had a pretty good weekend of football. And with there only being 4 games done, there's a reasonable chance that this podcast might actually look something like a review podcast as opposed to our usual weekly effort.
Pretty good week of football is probably a little generous. Those games there was not one single close game of the weekend, and they all kind of, with about 15 minutes left in the game, seemed decided. So a little anticlimactic, but I thought it ended on at least an exciting-ish game there for the Giants-Packers.
Yeah, they did. Certainly a couple of them failed to live up to expectations for a couple of different reasons. I think a couple of them were decent enough.
I was going to say, I think Oakland, Texas lived up to every expectation anyone could have had, assuming it was billed as the worst playoff game of all time.
The negative side of things. But you have a hot take that you want to start the podcast with this week, so lay it on us.
I thought it was fitting because this was the day of the hot take. I think of the whole sports season, this was more hot takes coming out today than any day of the entire NFL season because of Odell Beckham, Sterling Shepard, the boat party in Miami a week ago. And I think I listened, all the hot takes were basically the same, the on the boat, not a team player, that sort of stuff. But I think everyone was getting it wrong. The fact that him being on a boat a week ago affected his play. That didn't affect his play. I mean, you can get wasted a week ago. That doesn't affect anything. That doesn't affect my analysis. I just don't trust that that's an actual reason behind him having 3 drops, basically having one of his worst games of the season. What did affect him was the fact that this is Odell Beckham we're talking about. This is a guy who plans celebrations out where he proposes to kicking nets. He's not completely, all up there in the head. He was worried about everyone's reaction to that boat party. That's why he played poorly. He was focused on what people would say about him if he did have a bad game, and that's what got in his head, not the fact that he was on the boat. The fact that what everyone was going to say about him on the boat was why he played poorly.
I mean,
that's what. Yep.
NFL players need to understand that boats are bad. Nothing good comes from a boat party, whether you're the Vikings and the Love Boat or whether you're the Giants and whatever that's going to go down being dubbed as. Boats, bad idea. Anything else you want to do, go for it. But boats, just stay away from the boats. It's a bad idea. It's not going to do any good. Odell Beckham was terrible in that game. I mean, 3 drops. I think we recorded him 4 on, what did he end up with? 11, 12 targets, something like that. Which before that game,
he had like 4 all season.
Regular season, it was 8 drops on 109 catchable balls. But obviously that's still, not even in the same ballpark as 3 from 12 or 3 from 11 or whatever it was however many targets he had. And, that last one was tough. That was close. It's debatable whether you want to call that a drop or not. We said it hit him on both hands, and he could have done a better job of kind of tracking it and adjusting to it. It was definitely overthrown, but still, the first one was just stone cold, right in the hands, absolute clanger, the kind that you would expect any human being with basic motor functions to be able to catch.
And it was on 3rd down too.
Yes.
Awesome.
And the second one was the drop touchdown, which again, slightly overthrown if you want to be ridiculous.
I don't even think so. Because it went both hands.
And it went through both hands, right? He had to
theoretically
stretch for it, but that was it.
Yeah, that's the position you want to put it in because, the farther out it goes, the less chance the DB has of hitting the ball. So I wouldn't call that in any way overthrown.
No, I mean, I'm talking like
just a tough catch. Like it was not easy, but it wasn't,
If you want to say it's overthrown, you're talking like 6 inches, just to make it so he doesn't have to quite stretch that much. But if you're going to be the guy who goes making one-handed catches for fun in warm-ups and can make that Dallas catch, the signature catch, it's going to live in NFL history, you have to catch all of them. I mean, you can't be that guy and drop the one that comes right to your hands without any kind of problem. I mean, was it against
Maybe you should
Washington?
practice two-handers in warm-ups
Maybe
sometime.
was the one he had on the left sideline where he launched, full length dive to bring in a touchdown that was almost as impressive as his signature one-handed thing. I mean, that was way harder than the one that he dropped in this game. And those were huge plays in the course of this game because it was pretty close for almost the duration of Odell Beckham's bad play. It only got out of control kind of late in the game.
Yeah, the Giants in that first half should have scored 14, 17 points, something like that. They really got crushed by drops. That one drive, they dropped, I think, 3 balls. Sterling Shepard had one in his hands that Micah Hyde got a hand in there, but it wasn't, prohibitive to him catching the ball. And then they dropped one on third down. It was a 3rd and short that would have converted as well on that drive. So they took multiple points off the board, the wide receivers, but Odell Beckham, and that you can't go on a boat then a week later show up and have that kind of performance and not expect to just get heat from every single person in the universe.
It's kind of ironic. We were talking about how, at the moment Eli Manning was the guy that was going to be holding this Giants team back, and otherwise he had a great defense and great receivers, and he was the guy that was the problem. Eli Manning actually played okay and played pretty well early. His receivers were dropping the ball, and eventually the defense kind of capitulated as well, although they kind of gave it a pretty good run for at least half the game.
Now, once DRC was out, that was just a ridiculous blow to that defense. They rely on the fact that they have 2 cornerbacks that can guard any wide receiver, and you can put them in any sort of situation, and you feel comfortable with the fact that they're not going to get burnt. All of a sudden, that wasn't there. That sort of safety net, that sort of confidence that you have as a defensive coordinator isn't there. Doesn't allow you to do nearly as many things as they would have wanted to. They still held up well over the first half, but the second half, it started to show.
How much do you think they kind of, not that they ran out of ideas, but that Rodgers had now seen everything they were going to throw at him? The first half, one of the interesting things about Rodgers is that you basically can't blitz him. We've talked before about how kind of impossible to defend he is because you can't sell out to pass rush him because he just escapes the pocket, and that's where he's at his most dangerous. If you try and keep him in the pocket, he just has all day to throw. If you blitz him, he just throws it to the open guy that's in the back end of that scheme. And if you don't blitz him, he just carves you up. But the Giants actually managed to affect him with the blitz. They were throwing some weird blitzes at him that he clearly hadn't seen before, wasn't expecting. They were getting home. And then they just didn't have that success later on in the game. Was it a case of Rodgers, okay, those were surprising, but now I've seen them coming, now I know what's going to happen, I can adjust to that, or what else happened?
I think so. I think there's some of that. The blitzes in the first half, you had free runners coming at times, not nearly as much second half, or when it was, there was, Rodgers knew the spot that the blitz was coming from, knew the opening, and was hitting guys quick. So I think there's definitely some of that. I think Steve tweeted out yesterday Rodgers' stats when defenses disguise their coverages when they roll safeties. He's one of the lower graded quarterbacks in the NFL. When teams are rolling from open safety looks to closed safety looks, that sort of stuff, or vice versa. And I just think you can only fool Aaron Rodgers for so long. Maybe you'll get him in the first half with those sort of stuff, but if you're not completely bringing new stuff at him again and again, there's only you just can't fool the best quarterback in the NFL for that many times.
It occurred to me during this game that this is a horrible matchup for the Dallas Cowboys to be sitting there waiting for, because either they're going to face the hottest team in the NFL in the Green Bay Packers, or they're going to face the division rival that beat them twice this season. Out of 3 defeats, 2 of them were to the Giants. Who did Dallas want to play more?
I think you would 100% want to play the Giants more if you were the Cowboys, just because the difficulty it takes to beat a team 3 times in a season, and then the third time being on the road. You would have to be a completely, have their number and be dominantly better than them to beat a team 3 times in a season. I would just don't think, as a Cowboys, the Cowboys would be pretty upset having lost twice in the regular season, want their revenge. You would come out. I just feel like that would be a better matchup. Now here, just because of the fact that Aaron Rodgers, there's really no figuring him out when he's in the zone like this. It's just basically, you have to keep up. You just have to keep pace offensively. Defensively, there's really no one thing you can do to say, oh, this is how we limit him. You just can't when he's playing like this. So I think that they would have rather had the Giants, but their matchup compared to the Patriots matchup is one of the biggest, most unfair advantages. And they're playing probably the team that you would least like to face of anyone that played this weekend. And they are the number one seed in the NFC. The Patriots are playing the team you would most like to face out of anyone playing by far. And just that ridiculous juxtaposition.
We'll get to that in just a second. I don't want to go too far down the kind of preview route of next week's games because we'll do that later in the week. But every game in the playoffs so far seems to have been a rematch of earlier in the season. I don't know if I haven't actually paid too much attention to how often that happens in the past, but this seems to have been more than usual. Obviously teams face each other in the regular season and then again in the playoffs, but every single game I think so far has been a rematch. But when Dallas and Green Bay played earlier this year, it was Aaron Rodgers' I think second worst game of the season. He had a PFF grade of 36.6, which is terrible, truly abysmal. And I don't know that the Packers offense has actually changed schematically. It's, they're not doing anything different. It's just that Rodgers has suddenly caught fire. He had Jordy Nelson back, whether he's going to still have him back after that shot he took to the side. But Dallas had seemed to figure out a way of shutting down those receivers with their coverage. They were playing, man coverage on the outside. The linebackers were dropping in these kind of mirrored hook to curl zones in the middle, and there was just nothing open all day. And even though they weren't getting a huge amount of pressure, Rodgers just didn't have anywhere to go with the ball. I mean, are they going to be able to do that again if nothing has changed really in this Green Bay offense?
I don't think they'll have near the same success. I think holding this offense at this point to 16 points like they did last time, even without Jordy Nelson, it's just not going to happen. Last matchup, they didn't have Jared Cook either, who I think has been a huge, boon for this offense. They didn't have Ty Montgomery playing running back, which I think has helped out this offense as well, just in terms of looks that they get from defenses. So I just don't think any team in the NFL is going to hold the Packers to 16 points the way they're playing right now. They scored, 38 against the Giants, 38 against the Vikings, 38 against the Seahawks. Just that offense is rolling right now. So I don't think you can expect to do that, but I think they will have some success defensively because of what their secondary can do. They still do have the cornerbacks that can play man coverage against the Packers, which is, I think, the way you have to beat this defense. You have to be able to man up with these wideouts, and the fact that Jordy Nelson is going to be a game time decision is going to be huge for them, because if he's out, that just, like we've said before, everyone has to bump up a slot, and then you get just more favorable matchups up and down the line if you're the Cowboys.
Let's go from that game to the one that looked ugly on paper and was ugly on the field as well. Oakland and Houston, which went pretty much exactly as we said it was going to go, which was one team is well used to playing with a crappy quarterback, and the other team was not used to playing with a crappy quarterback and hadn't figured out a way to adjust yet. Though actually Osweiler was vaguely acceptable in this game. It was just a case of Oakland, they didn't know what to do now that they didn't have a quarterback. Yeah,
I think calling Connor Cook a crappy quarterback at this point might be a little generous.
Well, crappy quarterback play.
No, he looked pretty abysmal in that one. He didn't get a lot of help. They dropped, I think, the most passes of anyone on the weekend, which was actually a kind of an underrated storyline for the Raiders all year. They were among the league leaders in terms of drop passes this season. Their wide receivers were, and they dropped 6 in this one, which that's not going to win you any games, especially with a backup quarterback. But Connor Cook, that's about what you expect from a rookie 4th round pick. You don't draft a guy in the 4th round if you think he can come in and win you a playoff game.
I mean, it's kind of unfortunate because, you put this guy out there and you know that he's not going to make enough plays to carry the team for you. So you can't drop the good passes that he does give. You're not going to get enough good passes that you can afford to spurn the ones that actually hit the receivers in the hands. And Oakland did that a few times in this game.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't actually see coming, which we didn't even mention on Thursday because I didn't know he was going to be out was Donald Penn with the injury, which was a monstrous blow to that offense because Donald Penn, one of the best pass protecting left tackles in the NFL. You go from him to Menelik Watson, who's a backup for a reason, and then you have him matched up against Jadeveon Clowney, and that was a nightmare. If I would have known that, I would have pumped some more money on that line because Connor Cook just basically was running for his life play after play with Jadeveon Clowney, who is not kind of got swept under the radar his first 2 seasons because he wasn't playing many snaps, wasn't getting these raw sack totals that people love, but he was still playing at a high level. Was playing at a high level again this year, and is definitely more than good enough to beat up backup tackles like he did.
What a crappy way to end the season for Donald Penn. Donald Penn is having had a Pro Bowl season, was absolutely fantastic. The one sack he gives up all season breaks Derek Carr, broken ankle, out for the season. And then he doesn't even play in the playoff game where he could have made a significant difference to actually try and win them a game against one of the weakest playoff opposition they could have actually drawn.
Yeah, you got to feel for him and just Raiders fans in general, how seeing, two of your franchise quarterback, your franchise left tackle, both, end the season the way they did was about as bad as it gets. That down the stretch for the Raiders was just heartbreak after heartbreak.
What about Jadeveon Clowney? So he is obviously an athletic freak. That was the big thing about him coming out, and even all the way back to high school, the crazy high school highlight reel tape was basically just him being twice the athlete of anyone else who was trying to
playing running back.
Yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous. It's like a common trend if you ever find any NFL player's high school tape. Typically, it's just they are twice the human being that the guys trying to deal with them are. But Clowney was like that in college as well, and everyone assumed that it would lead to him becoming this top-tier elite pass rusher. And that hasn't quite happened. And even now, when he's playing probably the best football of his NFL career, he was dominant in the run game, and he made a couple of big plays as a basically ragdolling Menelik Watson on that side of the line, and then obviously had the batted pass early in the game, and then the batted pass, the tip to himself that he intercepted. But it's not like he was this pass rushing dynamo. He still isn't the elite pass rusher that everyone expected him to be, and I wonder if he's ever going to become that guy.
I think he still has a chance because basically what he's doing right now is he has no moves as a pass rusher. When you watch him pass rush, it's either he bull rushes or he does the inside move, and then he's like finished at that point, which he's this coordinated guy. There's no reason to think he can't learn to do more things than just that. But at this point, those are his 2 go-tos, and that's what he has, and that's what he has in his tool bag, and he just needs to develop more tools. And I think there's no reason to think he can't do that in the future.
And also, we're seeing a trend now of there's been a lot of pass rushers recently that have taken a couple of years to get going, and to the point where people were labeling them all busts, and then suddenly these guys develop into really quite impressive pass rushers. And there's one on his own team, Whitley Merciless. I mean, Jadeveon Clowney was basically drafted because Whitley Merciless was seen as a bust. He wasn't the edge rusher they wanted him to be as a former first-round pick. Suddenly, he has become a legit pass-rushing threat, and the same is true with Melvin Ingram in San Diego. Nick Perry in Green Bay is starting to come around and become a bit more of that guy. We're seeing a lot of these edge rushers that it just takes them a couple of years to develop. Even if they're a first-round pick, it might not be too late.
Yeah, I think edge rush, like any other position, even though we see a lot of guys have early success, it's something you can develop. It's a skill that can be developed. Hands and, different sort of moves are still, you can still work on them. You can still develop and still add more tools to your tool bag and whatnot as your career goes on. And so writing guys off after 1 or 2 seasons, I think you have to wait until a 3rd season to basically evaluate a draft pick but then at that point, I think you can evaluate a draft pick because of the way rookie contracts work and the fact that you have to maximize, that 4-year, 5-year window that you get, and that, only getting a year production, even if the guy does turn into an elite player in that year 4, it's not really enough to hang your hat on because, you missed out on 3 years of a guy being, or potentially productive years at a cheap price.
Well, it's interesting because you're getting these guys that develop, and you've almost got no use out of it unless you can get these guys locked down to the second contract. Because, I mean, Ingram and Merciless in particular, they didn't even really turn it on until year 4. So you're talking potentially nothing from these guys until their contract year. Although if they're first round picks, there'll be another one on top of that. But you're talking about literally, you've got to re-sign these guys the second they get good. So you've almost, I don't want to say wasted, but you've basically got no value out of the guy's rookie contract where he's cheap. And you've potentially been harming yourself for a few years by actually getting this guy on the field and sort of developing him and waiting for him to become this player. But it's interesting that it's taken these guys that long to develop. And the really interesting thing for Houston is that they might not need Clowney to develop that part of his game, because you're going to have J.J. Watt coming back. You still have Whitney Merciless at the moment. If you can deploy those 3 guys on the field at the same time the way they wanted to this year and get them all 100%, that is still, in theory, terrifying for an opposing offense.
Yes, definitely. The key is, though, with those edge rushers, like you mentioned, being able to recognize the fact that, they're about to get good. The Texans realized, Whitney Merciless is about to get good, and they signed him to that extension just at the right time. He's made his contract extension's 4 years, $26 million, which for how talented a pass rusher he is cheap. Is about as good as it gets for that's such a great value contract for them. Whereas the fact that Melvin Ingram, Chargers didn't quite realize it, didn't quite see that this upturn in his career was about to happen, and now he's about to be a free agent. He's about to get twice what Whitney Merciless is. So they kind of got put behind the 8 ball in that part. So as an organization, you have to recognize when a guy is starting to turn it on. That's when you re-sign. That's when you start to maximize his value. Sort of like the Packers also did with Mike Daniels. Sign him to a team-friendly deal, get that team-friendly deal before everyone starts to catch on that this guy's actually, a playmaker in the league.
Yeah, those in-house contract extensions always work out so much cheaper than if you ever let a guy hit the open market, because the feeding frenzy just inflates the contract to an insane degree. So those were, I think, the 2 more competitive games, I guess. Now let's go to the 2 that were fairly solid ass kickings. Let's do this one first, because I don't want to have the risk of having it at the end and us just wallowing or reveling in how it went. But Detroit went up to Seattle and they got owned, more or less as we said they would. They got found out. They weren't as good as they looked, and Seattle pretty much trounced them.
Basically, if you're the Lions, you just priority number 1 this offseason is a nose tackle, a legitimate nose tackle, and maybe another defensive tackle as well, because that's where they lost the game, so to speak, on that side of the ball at least. The Seahawks kept doing kept doing the inside zone read. They kept doing it because the defensive tackles for the Lions were 2 to 3 yards off the line of scrimmage every time they did. They just couldn't hold up to the double teams. And at that point, you're getting 4 yards a pop baseline, and then with the possibility of getting 8 to 10 to 15 or whatever that Thomas Rawls was breaking off at times. So they just couldn't stop the zone read. And after that, the Seattle Seahawks have everything they want to do offensively if you can't stop the zone read. And that was basically the position that the Lions were in all game. So priority number 1 this offseason. No, A'Shawn Robinson was a 2nd-round pick. He could develop into something as a run stuffer, but they need someone else in there that can actually, affect their run. I think we saw what Damon Harrison did to the Giants defense, having them, not have to worry about that sort of thing happening to them. And with the weak linebackers that they have for the Giants, I think the Lions could use someone like that, because that would shore up a lot of things that were wrong for this defense all season long.
So yeah, we've been smug with the Lions, but let's talk about reasons they have to be optimistic, because they did overachieve. They did get to a place where I don't think anybody saw them going. They got themselves into the playoffs, and even if that was overachieving this season, what do they have to be optimistic about going forward? What are the good parts of this team?
Well, I think the number 1 reason to be optimistic is you have Matt Stafford at quarterback. You have a legitimate quarterback. I'd put him around the top 10-ish area. I think he's that good of a quarterback to where, you just put a competent team around him and you are in the Super Bowl conversation. They were in the playoffs this year without much talent to speak of that we've spoke of all this season long. But I think with a quarterback like that, you were always somewhat in the mix, as we saw this season. So I think if they just can add to the other side of the ball, to the defense side of the ball, and add something to that running game, they will be, a team that's on the verge of being a perennial playoff team.
And for the Seahawks, this is like standard Seahawks win in the playoffs, which is the offensive line wasn't great. Russell Wilson was. The running game was. They got play from the skill positions. Their defense pretty much dominated. But at some point, let's ask the question. Is that offensive line going to catch up to them the way I have said it will all the way through the year? Are they going to be able to keep overcoming how bad it is?
No.
So you're saying
no.
When they actually come against... So the problem is, Atlanta don't have a defensive front much more formidable than Detroit. Dallas have a better one, I guess, but it's still not going to scare them. I mean, they may not come unstuck until the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I still think, though, that all it takes is a couple splash sacks and the offense goes to... the offense just goes in the tank because they don't have that consistent. They rely far too much on big plays down the field to generate their offense. Their underneath sort of passing game doesn't, even in this one, didn't do them any favors. They were averaging something like 6 yards per catch on throws within 10 yards. They just weren't getting anything after the catch. The short passing game wasn't, fueling them down the field. They relied on, the big plays to Doug Baldwin and Paul Richardson to score their touchdowns or to get those scoring drives. So I think that when you rely on the deep passing game and splash plays so much, all it takes is one sack and your drive's basically derailed. You just don't have the sort of offensive consistency to overcome that. And I think that's their offensive line is built to seed sacks at a ridiculously high rate if Russell Wilson, isn't able to get the ball out quickly.
When did Paul Richardson turn into Randy Moss, by the way?
I don't think he's turned into Randy Moss, but I don't think I've ever seen a 3-catch performance more impressive than that.
That was ridiculous. I missed this game live, and I was catching up on the highlights the next day before I went through the game. And the first catch they showed was the ridiculous end zone, through the defensive back one. And you're like, okay, that in and of itself is a game. I mean, that's a ridiculous. The next one is, another obscene catch down the sideline. I mean, this, from nothing, this guy just pulled out 2 or 3 of the most ridiculous catches anyone has had over the last however many games.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's ever going to happen to him ever again in his life. I mean, he might at some point be a consistent receiver, but those were 2 catches he may never make again in his career, those 2 one-handers. He may never have a one-handed catch the rest of his NFL career. I mean, I'd bet $1,000 he doesn't have a catch more impressive than that end zone one because, few people ever do. But yeah, that's a once in a lifetime. That's a performance you'll remember for a while.
And then the fourth game of the weekend was the one that I got really wrong. I thought Miami could keep this close, and it started about as bad as it could possibly start for that to happen, which is like a couple of plays in, bam, quick screen to Antonio Brown, goes the distance, touchdown. A few plays after that, another huge play to Antonio Brown. Now you're 14 down. The game plan's gone. The idea that you can just pound the ball, keep it close on the ground, use that power running game in smoke. And then when they actually did try and run the ball, they just weren't able to get that kind of production out of Jay Ajayi in the running game anyway. So it basically just got completely out of their control. They had to put the ball into Matt Moore's hands. He wasn't really able to shoulder the load on his own, and the defense couldn't stop anything.
Yeah, the first score, not scoring first, was basically the kiss of death for Miami. If they could have even put a field goal up on the scoreboard first, I think they still would have covered. But being down 7-0, having to dig out of a hole, basically putting the ball in Matt Moore's hands to try to bring you back in that game, it was about the worst thing you can do, especially considering that Matt Moore, was I don't want to say concussed because he passed concussion protocol, but he wasn't all there after that hit they took from Bud Dupree. He wasn't the same quarterback that we saw. A part of his soul left his body, I'll say, on that hit.
That was a big shot. That game got interesting, actually. Around about that time, the Steelers were walking a line, I would say, in terms of post-play contact, getting very kind of chippy and, shoving guys and sort of making a point of standing over them as they're getting up and all that kind of stuff. It looked like it might kind of kick off in a relatively serious way, but in the end, the closest it came was Jay Ajayi looking a little annoyed when Matt Moore got obliterated on that hit and then getting flagged to give the 15 yards back.
Yeah, well, you're saying that guys like James Harrison and Ndamukong Suh got a little chippy. That's a surprise.
Actually, I think James Harrison was the one guy that was kind of in control of it all. He just seemed happy to be there and having fun. It was the defensive backs and the rest of the linebackers that seemed to be getting a little bit chippy and over the line.
No, I think Pitt is more like the Green Bay Packers than people want to admit at this point. I think, but it's basically the fact that Le'Veon Bell is Aaron Rodgers instead of Ben Roethlisberger being Aaron Rodgers. Because I don't know a way, if you're any defense in the NFL right now, that could actually contain Le'Veon Bell. Just the way he's running the football, he had plays where, no one should have gained, no one should have even got back to the line of scrimmage, and he went for 15, 20 yards. He's just untackleable. You have to be playing perfect team run defense all game long to, contain him. And so few teams are willing to do that. So few teams are willing to stay in their gap to a fault to try and, contain Le'Veon Bell. And he just continues to roll on teams.
You also need to get some kind of penetration to do it, because he's running the ball in such a way that he will just stop and wait for something to open up. I mean, he runs up to the line, literally just puts a hand on the back of one of his offensive linemen and waits until somebody takes a peek in the wrong gap, somebody moves slightly to the wrong side they shouldn't be, and suddenly there's a crease, and then he just bursts through it again. Like, if you're gonna stop the guy from doing that, the only way to do that is to either, like you say, everybody maintain perfect gap discipline the entire time, or somebody's got to get on his side of the line of scrimmage. You have to actually get into the backfield and force something to break down. And, he might still make a cut and make you pay for that, but at least you're increasing the odds in your favor as opposed to just sort of hoping that he can't find any space anywhere along the offensive line.
I completely agree. It's very difficult. You have to be perfect, play after play after play. And so few teams are willing to do that, So the Dolphins for sure are not a team that's willing to do that. And Ndamukong Suh is a guy who loves to, make the plays himself as opposed to, hold a guard to let someone else make a play. So as much as people thought Kiko Alonso could shut down Le'Veon Bell all on his own, that's just not possible.
You say people, what you really mean is Omar thought that, and Omar was very wrong.
Wait, what? Some people thought that.
Yes, they did. Talk about James Harrison. That man was born in 1978, and he is still the best outside linebacker that the Steelers have. He was the best defender on the field in this game. He got more production than the entire Miami defense did on his own. He got more production than I think the entire Steelers linebacker core other than himself got. You shouldn't be able to do that at 38 years old.
No, it is. I still go back to, what was it, 2013, the year he was with the Bengals, 2013, maybe, I want to say. But it was a crime against humanity to put James Harrison in an off-ball linebacker role. I know he blitzed a lot still and whatnot, but oh my gosh, the fact that they played Michael Johnson and Carlos Dunlap over him on the edge, this is one of the best edge rushers of his generation, one of the most fun players to watch in the NFL, and you tried to make him into an off-ball linebacker.
It kind of worked.
If you're making a case against Marvin Lewis to get fired, that should be number front and center.
But it kind of worked. I mean, he actually he became this
he was good at it,
incredibly awesome, two-down thumping strong side linebacker for them. He looked like he could almost have this second career as a kind of Bart Scott style, run thumper for them in that role, which is, it's crazy because, I mean, we talk all the time about how a lot of NFL schemes are sort of interchangeable and how it doesn't, there's, whether you're a 3-4 outside linebacker or a 4-3 defensive end, it doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. You're basically lining up in the same spot. But 3-4 outside linebacker versus 4-3 outside linebacker is not the same thing. I mean, that is typically a significant difference in what you're asking those guys to do. And the difference between what he was doing in Pittsburgh and what they were asking him to do in Cincinnati was a monster departure. And to go from one to the other and still be good is ridiculous.
Yes, I also love the fact that there are these old, edge rushers who, barely played during the season. Guys like DeMarcus Ware, Julius Peppers, James Harrison, Dwight Freeney, guys who, you kind of put them in a spot role during the season. And, they're still good in that. But then we see them start getting real, full games during the playoffs. And it's like they haven't lost a step. Guys who just, they're going to be rushing the passer till they're 40 and still beating up on crappy offensive tackles like DeMarcus Ware did last year down the stretch. So that's always fun to watch in the playoffs.
I mean, his season arc is only going up. I mean, he's had all of his good games in the second half of the season. He's had 3 of his best 5 games in the last few weeks. And it's really basically just how much they've played him. I mean, he's only started the last half dozen weeks or so, and those have been all of his monster games. Basically, and it's particularly ridiculous because the Steelers have been trying to replace this guy for like half a dozen seasons at this point.
Yeah, Jarvis Jones, Bud Dupree. They have 2 first-rounders. And
they keep drafting first-round edge rushers to replace James Harrison because eventually the guy has got to stop being good. And yet he consistently outplays them.
Does he have to stop being good?
Eventually, yeah.
Do we know he's going to fall off?
Well, we're getting to
I don't think we know that at this point, is my thing.
Put it this way. It's at the point where it's entirely understandable that there is a random drug tester turning up at his house at seemingly regular intervals.
Just every piss he takes has to be in a cup at this point.
And his name crops up, in various investigations into it and that kind of thing. I mean, as much as he might feel upset about that, it's getting to the point where, like, dude, I mean, you have to. At this point, the balance of probability says we should be expecting it now rather than anything else.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, he just. I went through that game kind of play by play today doing the review, and he was just beating Brandon Albert on every single snap. I mean, even when he wasn't getting pressure, he was, we were giving what we call defeated blocks, which is essentially a pressure, but the quarterback gets rid of the ball before it has a chance to actually impact him. But he was just, Albert might as well have not been there. He was essentially a moving turnstile. It was just enough to make James Harrison run around a little bit, but it wasn't actually slowing him down.
Yeah, James Harrison really basically is Barry Bonds hitting like 40 home runs at 44 years old at this point.
Yes, and as from what little I know,
not slowing down at all.
From what little I know about baseball, that wasn't all organic carrot juice creating that.
Allegedly,
it was down to some possibly Mexican supplements. All I'm saying is that at this point, I think there's a reasonable it's reasonable to think that James Harrison is not 100% natural, but shows no sign of slowing down. If anything, is getting stronger as the playoffs go, or as the season goes on into the playoffs. And this is a guy with career history of making obscene playoff-defining plays.
I really, that game next week against the Chiefs is going to be a good one, because I think either of these teams could legitimately give the Patriots a game. It's just too bad that the Patriots are playing the Texans and not a real team this week.
Yeah, it's a shame they don't have to go through both of them as opposed to just one.
Or even a Raiders team.
Yes. So Dallas got a tough game against Green Bay. The NFC, what do we think quickly about the Seahawks and the Falcons?
That's a great rematch. I still think that the Falcons' offense, how good it is not one that just gets shut down easily. I still think they're going to put up, much like Green Bay's offense. I just don't think you can bottle them up. I still think they're going to put up in the 20s. The thing is, Falcons' defense is still the Falcons defense, still one of the worst defenses in the NFL. And they've been, without their best cornerback, Desmond Trufant, for the second half of the year now. And that's, it's just not the same. It's not the same on the secondary, even if the numbers haven't looked especially that much worse over the second half of the year as compared to the first. So I think it will be a close one. That's probably going to be one of the best games of the week. And I think the Packers Cowboys one is the one I'm looking forward to the most. Then that one, then Chiefs Steelers, then probably Pats Texans.
Yeah, this week has the potential to be 3 really good games, and the Patriots getting a bye week essentially.
Yeah, I think they'll actually be close games this weekend as opposed to semi-close then blowouts. I think we'll get 3 games going down to the wire.
Cool. That's going to do it for us. I think we actually reviewed a week for once. We didn't go off the rails too much, but we will be back later in the week with Tuck to preview the games we have just briefly previewed. And then we'll do this little preview review thing the way we're supposed to do it all the way through the postseason, and then let's see where we take it from there. You're going to the Senior Bowl, aren't you, Mike?
I will be there.
So we should see if we can figure out a way of folding that into the podcast. Have you reporting live from Lad People Stadium that thing takes place at?
Correct. Yep. I believe so.
Yeah, so we'll see if we can fold that in and get some on the ground practice reports or see what Mike sees. But that's going to do it for this week. Hope you enjoyed listening to this one. Take it easy, everyone.